148. Let's get to Ant-Man and the Wasp, the second film in the trilogy. This one came out in 2018, is once again directed by Peyton Reed. It stars Paul Rudd, Evangeline Lilly, basically everyone from the original, as well as Walton Goggins, Hannah John Kamen, Abby Ryder Fortson, T.I. is in there briefly, Michelle Pfeiffer, Lawrence Fishburne, and the synopsis is, as Scott Lang balances being both a superhero and a father, Hope Van Dyne and Dr. Hank Pym present an urgent new mission that finds the Ant-Man fighting alongside the Wasp to uncover secrets from their past. I think I saw this one in theaters. I'm pretty sure I did, because I think we reviewed it on the show when it first came out. And at the time, I really liked it. When I first saw it, I liked it, because I was already a fan of Ant-Man, and I was looking forward to seeing what they did with the Wasp, because even with the first one as well, which I didn't mention, I knew nothing about this character. I'd never heard of him before it had been announced, so I knew nothing about Ant-Man, knew nothing about the Wasp, none of that. So all this was new to me, and very excitingly so. And I've seen this one probably maybe 3 times over the years, and I think it's almost as good as the first, maybe a little. I think it went down a little bit when I watched all 3 of them together. But the first thing I wanted to get off right out of the gate is one reason that this movie is elevated or really sticks with me and always kind of makes me want to go back and revisit it. And I mentioned this in my Letterboxd review. Follow me there if you haven't. Is I think this movie has one of the best villains of the MCU. I don't know if that's a hot take or not. And there's not a really high bar for great villains in the MCU. I think Winter Soldier is by far the best. But especially when it comes to standalone movies, the villains are typically not great, which to me, I'm a huge villain guy. I love a good villain in a superhero movie. And I don't know the exact reasonings as to why it works so well, or, whose idea it was, or, how it all came to be. But the villain played by Hannah John Kamen, or I guess the character's name is Ava, I think that design of the character, like the costume, the face mask with the red eyes, the hood, the silver suit, the performance by that actress who hasn't been in a whole lot. She was in Ready Player One for a little bit, Tomb Raider, the reboot film. So she hasn't been in a whole lot. I think she is fantastic in this. And then also what makes it all work the best is the motivation, where she's basically been given this death sentence by this, I don't even know how to explain it, this cell destruction reformation thing that happened. And so she's basically doing what she's doing to avoid death, not the worst motivation. And so she's not really an inherently evil person, but of course I don't defend her. But what makes a great villain work especially is when there's a decent motivation and relatability to them. So all 3 of those aspects really, really work for me every single time I watch it. And I feel like it's kind of an underrated, swept under the rug villain and movie, I guess, because it's a sequel to Ant-Man, and so people don't really take much stock in that. But I think if you looked at all of the MCU and all of the villains, to me, this is by far one of the best. And so I just wish that she was in the movie more, or she had reappeared in other films, because I loved whenever she was on screen. I love the look of her cell reforming, where it's like kind of a mirage, hazy look to her character, and her never really being able to have peace from all that. So I think if she wasn't as good, the movie would be much lesser for me, but she definitely keeps the movie afloat a lot of the time. But besides that, I think the rest of the movie is still good. Like, it's very a light tone, it's comedic, good chemistry, and overall performances from everybody. And I love the Wasp. I think Evangeline Lilly is so good in that role, and I love the design of the Wasp, the wings. I think all that stuff looks so good. And personally, it's just a subjective thing. I love seeing, it's almost like the Toy Story effect, where it's seeing things from a miniature perspective. Everything is huge around you. I think that's one reason why I really like Ant-Man, is that difference and freshness of perspective with characters, and especially when it comes to sci-fi, fantasy, anything like that. So I love it when they're tiny and they're flying around into little spaces, and all that just works for me. I don't know why exactly, it just does. And I think the fact that she gets to fly, and then Ant-Man flies on an ant. I think that's just a really clever, funny visual too. So there's a lot of little things. There's nothing really crazy great about any of that. It's just little moments that work. But besides that, Walton Goggins, I didn't mention him yet. He's good. I like him in everything. I don't think he's ever bad, but there's not a lot to that character, and at times it feels a little injected in for not much reason, but it's not that bad. It's not that long of a movie, so not too upset about it. Lawrence Fishburne, always good. Also, of course, Michelle Pfeiffer, amazing in everything. She's fantastic. But talking about some specific things that I really like, one visual that I really like comedically is when they're in the school and they shrink Paul Rudd down to a sort of toddler, or not toddler, but like kid size. And then he's in this huge baggy blue hoodie and he's trying to meander through the hallways, and a teacher stops him and then he just runs away. The scene where Ant-Man becomes giant. Oh, and another great comment. Like, that's one thing about this series is it does have, especially in these first two, it has very solid comedy, like actual good writing, clever dialogue. It's not just ridiculous, crazy sequences that they try and force in. It's just very little subtle moments of good comedy, whether it's visual or writing or performance even. So another thing, though, is the moment where Michelle Pfeiffer's character inhabits Paul Rudd, and then you see Paul Rudd acting like Michael Douglas's wife, and then of course Evangeline Lilly's mother, and then it's like Michelle Pfeiffer and Paul Rudd. I think that's hilarious, and Paul Rudd does that perfectly. The car chase where Evangeline Lilly is driving and Ghost is chasing them, that's good. So like there's really, I think in comparison to the first one, there's not as much of the creativity when it comes to Ant-Man, but there's still enough to keep that going. I just think that this being the sequel and there not really being a huge difference in plot or structure, there are points where it sort of drags, the pacing falls off, the comedy falls off, it maybe gets a little too, not silly. I don't mind it talking about the quantum realm and all that stuff. I don't care about that. But there are points, I think, in having watched all three of these in succession, fairly close together, there are points where I'm like, all right, let's kind of wrap this up, or give me more Ghost, give me more Wasp. So those observations bring it down a little bit, not by much. It's still one that I can always easily pop on. It's not that hard to follow. It's light on its feet, and it also brings back some iconic elements from the first, like Michael Pena's monologues about the stories and flashbacks. That still works for me. I love it. So I think in these movies, and we'll get to the third one, I think it is going steadily, not steadily down, but slightly down each time, which can be kind of normal with trilogies and these cinematic universes. It's not a big deal, but I think that at the same time, even though, and we'll get to part 3, even though I didn't love part 3, I just wish they would make more of these movies. I think that of all the characters in the MCU who I see way too often, I don't see enough of Ant-Man or the Wasp. I wouldn't be mind if the Wasp just got her own movie. I'd be fine with that. And how you really are on a completely blank slate for what you can do with that character, even just from a visual creative perspective. All right, where are we going to go next? What could he get into? What could he get out of? How big could he get? How small could he get? That sort of thing. I do think that what makes these first two work better is it's mostly grounded in a reality of we're in the real world. We're not in Quantumania where everything is fantasy. What works is, all right, what if you were this guy or the Wasp in a real world and you could shrink and get bigger, etc. So sadly, I think they took a misstep with part 3, not to spoil too much, but I think was the main issue. So yeah, if you haven't seen it for a while, I'd give it a revisit, especially for Ghost. Love Ghost, will always love Ghost. We need more Ghost. Just saying. Put it on the record. So yeah, that one is a heavy 3.5 out of 5.